rather than doing a round robin of introductions today, which I know took up quite a bit of the call last time, Nicola, could you just kind of take us through anybody who wasn't here last time, or introduce anybody who wasn't here last time, and any apologies? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. The apologies I had were from Ruben of AAU from North Herts, Lucy Davis from Plymouth, John Taylor from Oldham, Kamal Patel and Robert Sowden also from Plymouth, and Nick Smith from Bristol. I'm expecting Jackie Purcell from Brent, who will be here for the first half an hour. And I've just been trying to check who who I can see on the screen. So we've got Jane Hamill from Bristol, who wasn't on the call last time. Just having a quick look. So I've got Richard Gadsby, Liz Whittles, Jane Hamill, Fiona Gibson, Jonathan Nunn, Louise Reeve, Georgina Chapman, Ben Jorgensen, Daryl Jadowski, and Gareth Wall. Have I missed anybody?
If anybody's not here, shout now. Or anybody's here, sorry.
That I haven't mentioned.
That you haven't mentioned.
Oh, Paul. Yes, I was just looking for you. Oh, yeah, got you.
Brilliant. Okay, good suggestion from Louise, who suggested, as many of us are getting used to this now, probably worth muting microphones if you're not talking, to avoid any unnecessary interference. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. So if we look at the agenda, which Nicola's sent through to us, first item was notes of the last meeting. So if we can just flick to those notes just to make sure we're comfortable with them. So can I just agree that people are happy with them in terms of accuracy? Were there any accuracy issues that anybody wants to flag? No, so I think we're happy that they're a correct set of notes. So thank you, Nicola, for capturing all of those. Were there any particular actions here that we need to pick up? I think if we're looking page by page, page 3, 4, Oldham, there was an action here around the summary of the government's recovery plan. Oh, it was de Havilland's summary. Did we, I think this was Jonathan was going to circulate a copy. Did he do that, Nicola? Do we know?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. So I'm assuming not, because I'm guessing it would come to me to send out. So if nobody else has seen it, I'll follow that up. Okay.
And then the other action on there, Rob Sowden from Plymouth was going to do some follow-up around some of the work that I think had been going on around equality and diversity around recovery. And I think it was quite a useful conversation at the last meeting around impact on particularly protected characteristic groups and some of the kind of inequalities that will emerge as we enter kind of recovery efforts. And I think Rob was going to share with the group either via the online forum or via kind of mail shot some of the work that Plymouth have been doing around this. So again, Nicola, do you know if
I've chased. I did have a note from Rob this morning sending his apologies, so I'll chase that as well.
Yeah, thanks. And then the other thing was recovery planning being a suitable theme for the next call, which it is. Thank you, Nicola. And then Nicola and myself had a conversation about some of the learning, which I kind of talked about at the last meeting, which is on the agenda as well for today. So I think that's everything. Okay, so moving on to on the agenda then, we've got item 3 was a bit of thinking that I've given, and as I say, spoken to Nicola last week around this, which was many of the conversations at our last call were around efforts that we've undertaken within our councils around responding initially to COVID-19, and now starting to think of some of the recovery efforts, and really kind of developing the idea that we might be able to kind of develop some action learning around what we've been doing. And I think the range of examples that were coming at the last meeting range from things like thinking about how we're sourcing PPE to how we're getting essential supplies to people who are shielding, to some of the wider work we might be doing with business communities within our areas, and some of the wider discussions around those people who are going to be adversely affected by COVID-19 as we kind of move into a recovery period, and some of the hardship issues that we're inevitably going to come across. And really the kind of thinking about what has enabled us as cooperative councils to think about this in a different way, to think about some of those values that are at the heart of why we're cooperative councils, the partnerships that we've developed with the voluntary sector, the relationship that we already have with certain community organisations, but also local businesses, which have kind of made us draw on some of those values to support some of these efforts. And if there's a learning piece that we can draw together to say, what is it about cooperative councils that have made us quite different, to be agile and nimble in terms of some of our responses here, but also as we start to rebuild communities on the back of this, what are some of the kind of key principles that are going to underpin some of our recovery efforts? So the idea, as you've seen from the paper, is to pull together some action learning, whether it be through case studies or whether they're written case studies or vox pops or whatever we can do across the network, but really to draw out from that some of the values that we want to take forward as we start to build on that recovery, and what might be some of the things that we might want to share with others outside of the network. So thinking about the platform we have with the LGA, to really talk about why cooperation is at the heart of what we do, and it's going to be at the heart of some of the kind of thinking and some of our plans as we emerge from this. So really it was kind of putting some of those thoughts last time to paper and sharing it today, suggesting that we pull together a small officer group that might be willing to kind of start kind of some work around this and thinking about how we pull it together. We're kind of thinking it needs to be more practice focused. So, our suggestion is it doesn't necessarily go into the realm of our members at this stage, because it is more around action learning, around what we're practically doing on the ground, and, what officers can kind of learn from this. But yeah, it's very much a start of a 10. So really happy to open up a kind of discussion this morning around that, and kind of thoughts, ideas, suggestions from other colleagues. So happy to kind of put that as a bit of an intro, and then open up for discussion. Nicola, before we do that, do you want to kind of say anything in addition to what I've just said?
Thanks, Rob. We've got a values and principles board next Friday. So we've got two parts of our governance, for those of you that don't know. An executive oversight committee that's chaired by Sharon Taylor, leader of Stevenage, and our values and principles board, which is chaired by Chris Penberthy from Plymouth. The proposal is that we'll take a paper to next week's VMP that will be based on the one that you've got in front of you, but will include any members of this group that would like to support the formation and the ongoing delivery of this project. Hence trying to, timely really, having that conversation today so that we can put something together for next week. That's it really.
Thanks, Nicola. So would anybody like to offer any kind of thoughts, suggestions, ideas?
Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. I mean, I think through all of this, I mean, it's been an awful time for a lot of people, but there's been a lot of really, really good things have come out of this, and things that we have been trying to promote in terms of partnership and cooperation and civic pride and all those sorts of things, which have really, really worked well throughout this period. I mean, we developed a sort of an online community based around hashtag Love South Tyneside, which is based around sort of sharing the good things about South Tyneside and people who are volunteering, and even looking at a nice sunny day and posting it and that sort of thing. But through hashtag Love South Tyneside, we asked, we asked people to volunteer, and we had, it must have been about 200 odd volunteers that came through our website, and then we've passed them on to voluntary organisations. And I think that was a brilliant thing. And I think we need to capitalise on those partnerships and those ways of working. So I think it's a great idea. There's lots and lots of, I mean, even this sort of thing about meeting with remotely, which no one really sort of fancied before all of this. Now it seems like second nature. So I think it's a great idea to try to take those things forward into whatever is the new normal, really.
Thanks, Paul. Really, really useful. And I think, examples like Love South Tyneside really show how we can, build on that, obviously that community impetus around, people wanting to get involved and do things, and think about how we broker those kind of new partnerships and new relationships with people moving forward. It's exactly the kind of example that I think was coming out last time as well, in terms of the stuff that we've been doing, and it's kind of seems really important to build on that. Any other thoughts or ideas or suggestions from other areas?
Quick one from me. The campaign that Paul's just referred to, I've put in the chat box. So we had a blog from Councillor Ian Malcolm in the last month's or this month's newsletter. So I've put a link in there.
Okay, I think I think the other thing, as I've thought about this more, is we've got some really good examples at the moment from our immediate response work. I think the really interesting thing will be over the next few months as we develop some of our practice around recovery. And, for all of us, that recovery planning is going to look slightly different because of our particular local circumstances. But drawing out some of the learning there about the foundations that we're putting into kind of recovery, how we're helping, kind of reset local economies, what opportunities are we using, how are we turning this into an opportunity, but also to make sure people don't get left behind, and some of those things. So I think we've got some good examples from the stuff that we've done over the last few months, but actually there's probably more examples to come over the next few months as we start to develop some of those efforts. So I think it seems that we need to capture some of this. If we I think, Nicola, happy to take any kind of comments offline as well, but if people are happy to go away and think about this, and if they want to put any other thoughts via email to either send to myself or Nicola, preferably ahead of the Values and Principles Board next week, so we can kind of incorporate those thoughts. But really, there'll be that kind of political discussion next week at the Values and Principles Board, but hopefully, to kind of get the approval to think about this. And we're also looking at, what product might we want to pull together at the end. So will it be some kind of glossy publication? Will it be some kind of video? We're not quite sure, but, kind of looking at opportunities and avenues of funding as well to think about you know, what we might be able to produce, what's going to be most meaningful. So would obviously welcome thoughts on that as we go forward. But yeah, Nicola, you got your hand up?
Yeah. Sorry, just to say that I have had some volunteers already. So if you want to, so don't think you'll be the first, and don't be shy. You know, this is obviously a really good piece of work for the network to get involved in. And the other reason we want to take it through to values and principles is that we'd like all of the learning from this to be captured, and hopefully some additional funding to be put into this budget as well, in addition to what Rob's been bidding for. So yeah, that's it. If we can have it something that's validated by the CCIN, and how we've all worked together and the learnings from that, it's something that you know, we need to decide whether it, you know, what that might look like. So as Rob said, whether it's publication, whether it's a video, whether it's some vox pops. I can see Louise is really good at Zoom, and she's got her hand up.
Go ahead, Louise. Oh.
Hi there. Just one thing I wanted to clarify, and I'm sorry if this should perhaps have been obvious from the document. Are we talking about case studies and good practice from councils who happen to be in the Cooperative Councils network? Or are we looking for examples of good practice and case studies which showcase the principles of being a cooperative council?
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, good point. I think the rule of thumb normally with Nicola with this is it's been about sharing good practice within the network.
Yeah.
But also I think there's no harm in looking outside of the network if we can identify, you know, good examples of kind of cooperative practice. And, you know, it might be an opportunity to kind of talk to some of those councils about, you know, being part of a wider network that, you know, kind of share some of those values. But I think, for, you know, it's normally got a member focus. So, you know, it's normally about looking across the, you know, kind of 30 odd members that we've got around the practice. But I think from a desk-based point of view, there's no harm in looking at, you know, kind of other examples of good practice out there. And as long as we can draw out those cooperative values.
Sorry, I don't think I expressed my question very well. I wasn't so much asking about whether we should look for good practice for organisations outside the network. I was asking more about, do we say to people, provide us with examples of how you put your cooperative principles into action in this situation? Or are we saying, you're in the Cooperative Councils network, just tell us about something good you've done during the pandemic? And I suppose you could argue, if you're a cooperative council, everything you do is kind of done as a cooperative council. But is that how we're focusing this, or what's
I say the former. Definitely the former. I think the blog that I just shared from Ian Malcolm, it shows that that's what the cooperative council difference is. So it's using our values and principles. And the reason for taking it to the Values and Principles Board is that they have a role for pulling out anything that might not be supporting those global values and principles. So I don't think, and that's the reason, if you've ever bid for any funding through the policy labs or prototypes, it all goes through values and principles so that they can ask those difficult questions.
Perhaps that might need to be explicit when we start gathering the case studies. I'm just looking at the proposal. It says, let's see, first stage is going to be to call for case studies and vox pops, which is great. I'm just thinking whether we need to provide a little guidance to people about what they should be highlighting in those. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we'd need to be absolutely clear that we just don't want you know, kind of random good news stories. They've got to be anchored in some kind of, you know, kind of principle basis. I think that's a really good, valid point. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. As we say, feel free to send anything kind of offline if you want to kind of discuss that further. So our next item was really a bit of a general discussion. And Nicola, how do you want to play this? Because we've got we've got about half an hour left. So is this a bit of an opportunity for members to, or officers on the call, to talk about issues that they're currently grappling with, anything that they think might be kind of relevance in terms of, you know, starting to think through recovery plans and things that are kind of coming up in their patches?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't work for a local authority, but I see that the government guidelines are changing every day, and what you're grappling with on the ground is how to stay abreast of all of that. And you know, what is it that you're trying to plan ahead, as well as trying to deliver what the government is saying? Well, this is opening now, and this is what's happening now, and we heard this morning that schools probably won't open until September. There's lots of stuff around refuse collection and tips being open and that sort of thing. So it's how do you put that into practice, and what are the processes that you're following? I think we had a really good call last time in terms of those things that are the indicators and the dashboards, but it's, you know, what's next? What are your gold command? What are the sort of things that you're being asked to do?
Thanks, Nicola. Does anyone want to volunteer any thoughts from their areas on this?
I'll offer a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that we're grappling with at the minute is we're very keen to start to bring, although, you know, people are still working at home quite rightly, there's more and more people who it's more expedient to actually have them in the town hall, and there's all sorts of problems in terms of making that safe. A building that probably normally houses around 600 people, I think we reckon we can only get about 120 in there. So there's those problems. And from my own point of view, the thing that's really on my mind is, particularly with the community and voluntary sector, a lot of them being reliant on emergency grants and that sort of thing at the minute. It's actually thinking ahead to the long term, and how are we going to support those agencies, the CICs and the voluntary groups through into the future, and help them survive, a lot of them, because once the sort of safety net's gone, then they're going to have to go into the new normal, which is a bit of an unknown. And I think the third thing as well, which is more of an opportunity, is to try, and this upsurge of volunteers, it's the thing on my mind is to try and harness that and try and bring that into the future and get this new group of volunteers to continue to do so into the future and keep hold of them. So those are a few things that I'll offer anyway.
Thanks, Paul. Similar conversations go. I mean, we have almost identical conversations here in Stevenage around some of those things, and I think you're right in terms of the funding environment for the voluntary sector. We know that there's a bit of here and now funding, you know, bits of funding that have been announced, whether it's from the lottery or from other you know, kind of funders around dealing with the immediate response of COVID-19. But I think it's about that longer term survival of some of those voluntary organisations and what that means for them, particularly as some of the activities that they might want to attempt to resurrect, that they can't in the same way that they have in the past, and they might not have the resources and capabilities to be able to you know, tackle some of those moving forward. I think the other thing which is kind of interesting is around the kind of approach to local economies as well, and thinking about what does this mean for you know, a lot of our high streets and town centres and, you know, city centres, as we attempt to, you know, bring back kind of a bit of an economic revival. And what does this mean for kind of the kind of economic models that we've got in particular areas? And I know a number of us are looking at things like community wealth building and, you know, inclusive economy, work around inclusive economy. But I think now more so than ever, it's about, is this an opportunity to reset some of those, you know, kind of conditions within local areas, and, you know, think about some of that. So, I mean, yeah, I think there's lots that we're grappling with, and I think it's the struggle for a lot of us, and certainly here, is how we start to see some of that future horizon scanning, as well as trying to recover services and bring, you know, services back online, and think about the immediate here and now of, you know, some of those issues that we've got. There are other hands raised.
Hi, it's Charlotte from Sunderland. I can't raise my hand, sorry, I'm struggling with technology today. Is it okay to continue? Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, so we've got Charlotte and then Morgan. Yeah, so go ahead, Charlotte.
I can't find my hand. My computer, sharing computers with my daughter, and then you see settings have been changed. It's all a bit...
Don't worry.
Say no more. Very, very briefly, Sunderland's doing very similar stuff around community wealth building. Last week it launched a local support scheme for the voluntary community sector, grants ranging from £1,000 to £10,000. It's open for 3 weeks. I think there's been 188 applicants so far, overwhelming response, and that's very much been for those that didn't get anything from the government schemes that have been on offer. I'm mindful that we've had a local Sunderland collaboration group meeting this morning with funders, national funders, something that we've set up to see where we could join up and look at collaborative ways of working, or to help target certain VCS groups who have missed opportunities and so forth. But I'm mindful that the conversation that was coming forward this morning is, like many have said, it is about crisis support at the moment, and not a lot of it is about the longer term recovery programme side of things. So through the work we're doing to set up an alliance, a new infrastructure organisation, we're starting to look at what the future support model will look like to the voluntary community sector, the sort of the longer term recovery. But it's been quite interesting to talk to people like Community Fund and others, and for example a local funder, Ballinger Trust, where he was saying their investments, they've allocated a lot of money to the voluntary and community sector, but their investments mean they've got something like 2.7 million programme for the next 2 years of allocated grant, but they've only got 1.something million reserve, and they're saying that they're going to probably have to sell some assets, some capital to, you know, they're not getting the return on investment. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how funders react longer term as well, in that they're not getting the return on their investment either, which ultimately means there'll be less for the sector. So that was just to share where we are with some things that are happening in Sunderland. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Really helpful, and would be really interested to kind of learn about how some of that develops as things move on. But overwhelming in terms of the number of applications, and I think that just goes to show the issue out there and the need that's out there. So we've got other hands that popped up. I saw Morgan's go up physically. Morgan, do you still want to speak? And we've got Fiona and Georgina as well.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't work out the virtual hand raising. Yeah. I think one of the things we're trying to do in Cheshire West at the moment is we've set up a recovery board to really start trying to do that planned thinking about what services get turned on again and how, and really trying to review benefits we've found from the response we've had. One, volunteers. We asked for volunteers. We were flooded with people volunteering, almost more than we expected, and it was hard to kind of get a good ask from them because so many people came forward at once. That's been something we've grappled with quite a bit, but has really worked in some areas. But now basically what we're trying to do is kind of get a baseline of, right, well, what services have we stopped? we're getting individual bits of pressure, particularly politically, to turn certain things on again. And we seem to be doing that on quite an individual basis at the moment. So what we're trying to do is kind of go across all our services, work out, well, what have we stopped? What have been the issues from stopping it? So some things can they say stopped? Some things we need to turn back on again. Well, actually, how have we changed it in the short term? Because again, we found a lot of things people have had to take decisions. We've cut through some of our normal governance, and our partners, you know, the focus we have on a single priority means some things have changed, which we would have expected to take years. We've really cut through an awful lot of stuff very quickly. So as we're going through all our services, we're trying to think, well, actually, what have we learned recently from this that we want to take forward, and actually not just go back to how we used to do it, but pick something from now. How we had a big push from the local population that they want to be involved in this. There is an appetite for it. So how can we work with them on that? And then what things do we just need to do in the same way we did, but have a much more structured focus on which are which, and then we can take a kind of timetable forward. Well, these are options. When do these things come on board? And try and get it in a very structured conversation rather than having a massive push that, you know, we stop collecting green waste, like garden waste at the start of this. Big pushback on that politically. We've gone back to it again now. And possibly we could have had a better structured discussion about how we went back to that, whereas effectively we've really just turned that service back on again. So what we're trying to do is get ahead of the curve a little bit on that, so we can have those conversations in the right way and challenge how we're doing things rather than just turning things back on in a managed way.
Really, really valid point there, Morgan. Interestingly, how are you structuring some of those conversations? So are you just having that as a kind of a discursive exercise at the moment across kind of an officer level, or are you doing some kind of applying some kind of criteria or starting to think about structuring some of that? How are you approaching it?
We've done some baseline, put out some forms, get information back from senior managers. We've had that in now. What we're doing is structured hour-and-a-half interviews with directors. So basically we've got 14 directors in the council and the deputy chief executives who manage senior manager structure underneath them. Having a discussion with them, primarily from them having little mini workshops with their managers below them. And then under this, the board we're putting in place, there will be, we're looking like 8 cells. And again, we'll have workshops with those cells, look at this information to take that forward probably through June. And then basically we've got a fairly new engagement website we launched kind of autumn last year around our council plan engagement with local population. We've used that during the pandemic to kind of have a bit more of a discussion board about, you know, we had our council website, what to do if you're in trouble, questions you ask, which was quite not negative, but it's quite a scary website, the information that's on there. So we use this Participate Now website to do something more discursive about how are you coping with lockdown? Who are your local heroes? Oh, how are you finding homeschooling? You got any tips? What things are you using? Much more kind of conversational. And we're trying to use that as a way of changing the way that we talk with populations. And so now we've just relaunched a kind of Stronger Futures engagement, which is very much about, well, people talk about the new normal. What do we want from that? What do local people want the council to respond to in a different way? What do you want to keep going? And also alongside that, a big thing on active travel. So we've got a really nice map of the borough, which you can zoom in and out of and drop pins on specific junctions, specific roads, and go, actually, the reason I don't cycle here, the reason I avoid walking here is this. And so trying to get that kind of wider engagement, keep all that going, really.
Yeah, so a real opportunity there around things like crowdsourcing as well, isn't there, around just using that kind of platform-based engagement. Absolutely, and then people are more active participants. And
there's already things coming. There's a river through Chester, and there's a push for a cycle and footbridge in one area that's been going on for a little while. And already on the map, you can see, I think this is the second day it's been launched, there's 5 pins dropped on and people suggesting we crowdfund to put that bridge in place, which people like the idea of, and quite a few years ago, but then fell away. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on there.
Good. Thanks, Morgan. Really, really good. Mindful that we've got Fiona and Georgia waiting to talk. So Fiona, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Touching on what Morgan just said, in Cardiff, we're actually accelerating our active travel plans we'd launched a new transport white paper last year, looking at different cycleways in the city centre and in different suburbs within Cardiff, and we've actually brought those forward now. So one of the main routes through the city centre that's dual carriageway normally, we've actually coned off one of the lanes to enable people to maintain social distancing while walking or cycling. We're doing that in other district shopping centres as well. And last Friday we published a report looking at how we can reopen the city centre once non-essential retail opens, helping people to maintain social distancing. So we've been working with Arup. I don't know if people know who Arup are, but they're an employee-owned business who redesign cities, basically. So we're working with them to just think about how we can pedestrianise new streets, but maintain traffic access around the edge, perhaps, have spill-out spaces for business, for restaurants and cafes, to provide tables for them to help them maintain profitability. And one of the most exciting things is potentially using the castle grounds in the city centre as a space for restaurants and cafes to operate from as well. So we're just trying to think of sort of innovative ways and new things that we can do just to encourage people to come back into the city centre when they can, but make sure that they're safe as well.
Then there's some real innovation there. I think in spite of our challenges, we've got, a number of opportunities, and I think, kind of looking at travel and the way that people use spaces, kind of seems a really good opportunity here to think about, kind of carving out a different kind of place and how we might do that, particularly when there's a bit of an appetite to do so from, kind of our local populations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Fiona. And then Georgina, you also have been waiting patiently with your hand up.
Hi, yes. So I'm from NHDC in North Herts, and two things came to mind. One thing around what Charlotte was kind of saying, we just opened up a community support fund, which is kind of made up of two different things. One is kind of providing grants to smaller voluntary groups that need it, and the other thing is us approaching voluntary groups that we already know work well, or that we have contact with, and kind of asking them, how much money do you need to run for the next 4 months, 6 months, whatever, to try and kind of get some of that long-term recovery kicked off, and that's had some good applications. And the second thing is that I work a lot on climate change, and I know that there's been quite a lot of demands from Extinction Rebellion campaigners in our area, kind of trying to get the council to look at what we've changed during this pandemic, things like working at home, things like holding virtual meetings, and seeing what things from those kind of areas we could maintain or sustain or keep doing a little bit more of, to try and be a bit of a greener council. And I think I'm going to try and have some conversations with that, because it seems like a good idea. Yeah.
Thanks, Georgina. Has anybody else used kind of this as a bit of an opportunity to have that wider conversation about climate change and kind of framing this in more of a sustainable kind of operating model for us as councils? Anybody else kind of touched on any of that?
Certainly at Newcastle, we're looking at how we can redesign some of the major streets in the city centre. I think, like many people, we're sort of running on two tracks at the moment. One is how do we maintain safe social distancing within our city? And the other is, in the long term, what changes can we implement now that will pay long-term dividends in terms of supporting more sustainable forms of transport? I'm going to stop there, because I'm certainly not the lead officer on that, though I do work with quite a few people who are. But in future, we might, yes, that's certainly something we're looking at the moment.
Really helpful.
Rob,
thank you.
We've got,
sorry
to interject, but we've got Carmel Conway on the line. So she's Oxford City Council joined the network a week ago. I don't know if Carmel, knowing what I know about Oxford and the work that they've done on climate change, I wondered if there's anything that she can add. Sorry to drop you into this, Carmel. She's muted at the moment. Ah, there you go.
Hi, I'm muted now. Well, I was just listening in because this is my first meeting, and to kind of get a feel of what CCIN is about. But what we did is basically what a lot of you have done. We're just looking at redesigning our city centre and trying to make sure everyone's socially distant. And I think we're trying to figure out again what to do long term, and you know, what's the impact will be long term and what we need to do. But I was very interested to hear what Fiona had to say about working with Arab, and I was wondering how you actually spelt that, so I could look them up afterwards. But because I think that's a strategy that we need to look into, and hopefully it won't be the new normal for long. That's what I say, that we can go back in. But it is what it is for now. But yeah, so I'm just listening to all of your ideas, but we've just been going around photographing the streets, putting tables and chairs, arranging for them to be outside, that kind of thing that everybody else is doing. But I hadn't heard of Arab, and I thought that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That was helpful.
Yeah, hi Carmel. Yeah, Arab is ARUP.
Thank you very much. I had it wrong.
Thanks,
okay.
Fiona.
Thanks,
Fiona.
I think they're Swedish originally, but
Okay, thanks,
thank
Fiona. Thanks, Carmel.
Thank you.
Georgina, your hands is your hand still up from last time, or is? Or
Yes,
do you want...
sorry, it is. Let me lower
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So we've got Jonathan from Kirklees.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to add what I'm working on at the moment. So at the start of the pandemic response, I was, we actually had, I think it was 12 different work streams for the whole response, and I was on the one named Harnessing Community Capacity. So really working to kind of collate and share the both requests for support and the offers of volunteer support around our partnership structure, essentially. So working really closely with VCS anchor organisations that took the lead in different areas for the requests that it was appropriate to pass down to them, but also working with the mutual aid groups very closely. I've now shifted over into economic recovery planning. It's also worth mentioning right from the start, we had a work stream which was about looking at essentially how do we use this situation to make step changes in things that we want to achieve, and kind of barriers have been swept out of the way and it's been able to move things on very quickly. And so then being pretty upfront about saying, actually, when we come to go back to a new normal, you're going to have to make the case for going back to doing things the old way, so that we make sure that any good practice that's been developed and where we manage to take advantage of opportunities, we don't actually lose what we've achieved. And then shifting into the economic recovery plan, our framework for looking at that is essentially taking our people, partners, place framework as business, people and places, taking a very broad view of business as any employer, and then applying the cross-cutting themes of inclusive economy and environmental sustainability, so that we manage to make those big shifts in those two areas. And then doing some stuff which essentially 3 months ago we wouldn't have been able to even talk about doing. So as has been described elsewhere, pretty big shifts in walking and cycling planning and making space for that. Public art in our town centres as part of really changing the function of our town centres, as we have a very struggling high street, and then reviewing our two major town centre blueprint plans for Huddersfield and Dewsbury to see how we bring stuff forward and push stuff back, so that things come online at the right time and we get push for increased employment in low skilled roles and the like as we get things going, but also needing to work out how centres play off against smaller places that we've got, and where are there opportunities around building community through having lots more people working from home, local wealth building, because our out commuting population that might go to Leeds or Manchester to work are stuck at home. They have bigger disposable incomes sat in our local areas, where they can support our local businesses. Working out what the role of community business is, and we'll need a big skills push to get people back into work as unemployment jumps, but particularly around apprenticeships, clocking the big impact that there'll be for school or education leavers, particularly looking at the findings of the Resolution Foundation report, Class 2020, which is really helpful, and a big push on digital inclusion as well. But really kind of struggling, I think it's fair to say, working out how and when to really have proper conversations around what economy do people want to see, recognising that talking about the economy can often be quite conceptual and lacking in substance for people, but also not getting into a situation where people feel we've committed to things that actually is well beyond our control and the levers we've got available.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think some real food for thought in what you're saying, and I think kind of conceptually how people are going to be spending or living their lives differently as a consequence of this is something we've all got to kind of think about when it comes to kind of our own plans for our areas and what this means for a local economy and what opportunities it might mean for some of us in commuter areas. We're kind of a commuter town very much in Stevenage, and actually how might this create an opportunity for our local economy in terms of people who won't be commuting into London every day?
Yeah.
I think that's we've really got to start kind of thinking about the art of the possible. We've got a few more minutes left until we have to kind of close. Is there anything else any other colleagues want to kind of share while we're on this kind of topic, or things that we might want to consider as a network going forward? I can't see any other virtual hands up. I'm just scanning to see whether there's any physical hands in the air. But if anybody wants to shout, then please do now.
I think it would be good to hear if people would like another call in a month, and what we could discuss on that call. Is it more of what we've talked about today in terms of recovery planning? Is there a specific aspect that we want to delve into a little bit more?
Any thoughts, ideas?
Thinking about the proposal we were looking at earlier, just thinking that I think it would be around then we would be looking at, let me see, we'd be looking at follow-up interviews and member survey around September. So in a month's time, July, August, maybe an update on how the project is going, and if there's anything we wanted to discuss in detail that's coming out of that.
Good idea. Yeah. So that's something we should definitely do. Anything else from anyone else in terms of any other areas that we might want to focus effort on? Is a month about right, or how do people feel about that?
Are these calls useful?
I mean, they're useful to me because I am getting, you get an idea of what other councils are doing, and that's always a useful thing. And it's sometimes it's a comfort blanket to think, we're like, oh, they're doing the same things as us. Sometimes you get little gems of things and little ideas that you can bring back. So I think, I think it is a good idea. If anything, just to see a real face is nice as well.
I would say they were useful, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think if we could, sorry.
just very quickly, I think they would be especially useful if we use them alongside the Slack channel, so we have the discussion ongoing, not just waiting for the call.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we keep them to an hour as well, it doesn't ask too much of people's time. We keep them quite focused, and yeah, I think that's helpful. But yeah, you're right, Louise. Keeping an ongoing conversation makes absolute sense.
Can I say a couple of things, please, Rob?
Yeah.
I think, Louise, did you just say the Slack channel?
Yes, yes. I think you sent an email around about that recently.
Okay, so we've got an online forum. I'm not going to embarrass anybody by asking you if you've ever looked at it, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, whether it's a useful forum or whether we need to rip it up and start again, and if anybody's got any different ways of doing it that are much easier. I'm conscious that I get lots of messages on WhatsApp. I'm in lots of WhatsApp groups, but I'm sure that as local authorities, there's lots of different knowledge banks or different ways that you collect information that it will be worth me having a look at. And then on the same vein, also a technology question. We've reluctantly decided to move the annual conference, which was happening in Telford in October, to an online conference. And I'm conscious that about a third of the people on this call aren't able to connect in terms of visual participation on Zoom. I know some councils don't allow Microsoft Teams, and I want to find a platform that people is as open and inclusive to everyone as possible. So if you don't mind dropping me a line on that as well. I did an AGM on Saturday for the co-op group, and it was all done on YouTube. It had 800 people on it. But I don't, we're looking for something that hopefully a lot more people will attend. So we normally are around the 100 mark. It'd be nice if we could double that up this year. But it also for it to be very participatory. So having lots of groups that go, different groups within the main conference and then coming together for different sessions. So if you've got any potential IT solutions or you're using things yourselves that you think, actually this works really well for us, maybe we could roll it out to the rest of the network so that we can continue these conversations on a day-to-day basis. I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Nicola. Should we take that as an action for everyone to take away and get back to Nicola?
Thank you. I saw your note, Gareth. I've got that one. Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, well, if we've got any other business from anybody else? No? Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for dialing in. It's just before 12:30, so we finished on time. So look forward to catching up again, and hopefully Jonathan will be in the chair, well enough to be in the chair for the next meeting. So we'll see you all then.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.